Hey, welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. Once again, I'm your host, Pat. It's a lovely Sunday afternoon right now. I just got back from vacation, having a tall boy of Tradition Honey Brown Ale, which I believe is I think it's a Virginia brewery, not sponsored, just enjoying it. We were just up in Williamsburg, one of those Great Wolf Lodge places. It's an indoor water park, which in retrospect is like not really the best idea. The last time we went to one, we all kind of got sick. It's an indoor petri dish kind of deal, but knock on wood, so far we're all fine. We've been back since Friday. So it's been a little bit, like I said, last update, I've had a bunch of family stuff going on, so I haven't been able to update as much as I'd like, but I'm back on the map, just like Slapshot, with a couple stacks of punk CDs. Not really like a big overarching theme when it comes to this kind of stuff. I thought it was funny that a couple of months ago I was on a binge of going on Discogs and buying stuff, and I ended up just getting this little urge to purchase some like OG or early pressings of punk on CD, which I realize is fairly uncommon. Most people want vinyl or cassette even of punk stuff, but I like the convenience of discographies, and a few of these I had when I was younger or wanted, and they're like, it's cool having the actual original pressing, even though a lot of them have been repressed. A good example, and to kick it off and segue into that, is the Massacre by the Exploited, which to this day actually might be my favorite Exploited record. It's a high school favorite. Don't get me wrong, I love the punk stuff. I love Troops of Tomorrow and all that good stuff, all the singles. Honestly, though, the weird kind of Killing Joke goth tinge that goes along with horror epics, and this is kind of their crossover speed metal approach at its best, I feel like. Beat the Bastards is a little too... It's a little groove tinged. It's a little like modern, overproduced, like 90s thrash or groove metal kind of version of the Exploited. And I like Death Before Dishonor a lot, but that's also really muddy and not nearly as focused as this. And although this is sort of like a speed metal approach, it holds on to that UK metal punk kind of vibe that a lot of their contemporaries like Broken Bones and stuff like that had going on. There's that Paul Muting kind of chugging thing going on, but a lot of kind of loose and lethal Motorhead and Venom added to, the snotty punk of the Exploited. Also, that is a massive mohawk on that dude. I don't know if the other guys have mohawk envy over that or what, but this came out on Triple X Records, and like I had it when I was a kid and somehow got conned out of my copy of it from an older punk that used to work at the gas station across the street from me. I think he was in his early 20s, so he was around for the 80s stuff. I think his name was John. But I think he traded me a shirt of this which is a pretty good deal, I think. I think that's what went down, but I ended up with a dubbed copy of this with a Shelter CD on the other side, which is an odd pairing, the Quest for Certainty and the Massacre on the same tape, but that's how it goes sometimes, Anyways, White Cross is the next in the pile. This is the Deaf, Dumb, and Blind compilation. It's got some unreleased tracks on it, which is really cool. This is the hardcore band from Virginia that I talked about, home of Great Wolf Lodge. I think that a few of the members ended up in Guar, so they must have been from not too far outside of Richmond there. This came out on that Grand Theft Audio label that I was talking about. There was a 7-inch at the end of this, which is the main thing that people talk about from them, the main release, which is great, like unhinged, really kind of abrasive, noisy US hardcore stuff. I think I'm trying to remember the name of the 7-inch. It's not really listed. The liner notes on these things aren't great. There's a couple of good live shots in there, but the name of the 7-inch is just called Fascist. And the album's called What's Going On. But there's almost an entire EP's worth of unreleased tracks on this, which are a little bit more focused than the Fascist 7-inch. They're like, they've got a kind of a gravelly throated sort of Poison Idea kind of thing going on, which is pretty great.
Are you ready to share the road? It's dark and red. See your soul.
A little leaning into like a rock and roll kind of feel, almost like Black Market Baby from DC, if you happen to know them. If not, check them out. They're great if you like punk and hardcore stuff. Kind of outside of the whole like straight-laced DC hardcore thing. They were like drinker brawler dudes, and despite that, they were buddies with Ian MacKaye and stuff like that. Then we've got 1984 in 2003 by Call the Police. It's a Burdett Brothers project, brothers that were in Tragedy and a bunch of other bands. Looks like the drummer was in Terminal Disgust, who are a low-rated 90s punk band from Dallas, who are really good. This is a cool record. It's got that kind of gloomy, dark thing that a lot of bands on Feral Ward, which was the label that put this out, had at the time, especially Tragedy. But this was a little bit more straightforward, not as epic as Tragedy, a lot more kind of like traditional hardcore. I feel like this gets looked over a lot. I mean, probably because it was not their main gig. It was just something they were doing probably for a project, but it's a really cool album. Excellent. Speaking of things that are excellent, we have X Los Angeles. Sorry, that's a bad pun. I needed to repurchase this. I had this on LP for years. I don't know why I got rid of it. I went through a lot of purges over the years, and I'm about to go through another major one. I've gone through about all of my CDs up until, I want to say, the letter L, and I've already filled up an entire one of those U.S. Postal Service totes, so I'm not sure exactly what means I'm going to be flipping these yet. Probably some in my actual distro, be finally updating that for the first time in quite a while, or possibly putting some of the more expensive stuff on eBay. We'll see. It's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm going to purge a bunch of tapes and vinyl too, but I just decided, it's not a money issue or anything like that. I just decided I need more space, and at a certain point, you just got to get rid of some stuff. Anyways, I won't be getting rid of anything as essential as X. If you're not familiar with X, or maybe you just heard of them in passing, they were part of like the first wave of LA punk, when a lot of that stuff was a lot more rock and roll inspired, kind of predating the hardcore movement. Like a lot of punk from that era, it's very inspired by a lot of 50s rock and roll. There's a strong sort of rockabilly guitar thing, courtesy of John Doe. Not courtesy of John Doe, courtesy of one Billy Zoom. Billy Zoom was the ex-guitarist. I don't know what I was thinking. Probably John Doe's just a forward figure in the band, being an actor and everything too. And I think he's one of the chief songwriters that probably wrote quite a few of the guitar parts, but huge gaffe on my part. I'm going to go commit seppuku in a moment. It's Billy Zoom is the ex-guitarist, okay? It's one thing I wasn't just going to put in a caption. That's pretty embarrassing. All right, I'm going to go hang my head in shame in the penalty box. I've seen them twice, too. They're great. Great stage presence on Billy Zoom. He's got that kind of Johnny Ramone kind of split thing going on. Awesome dude. Definitely like a big source of the whole rockabilly vibe of the band. All right, back to the action later. John Doe was one of those guys, almost like Lee Ving, that broke out and was in a bunch of movies and stuff like that. He was in Roadhouse, which is, an American piece of classic cinema right there for you. Los Angeles is a smoking record. It's so good. It was produced by the keyboardist from The Doors, Ray Manzaneric, if I'm saying that right. Great trade-off vocals between John Doe and Exene Cervenka. This sort of like tit-for-tat back and forth between them. Really smart lyrics. They've done a lot of records besides this one. This is by far the most energetic and punk sounding. They kind of went more and more into almost like a straight-up rockabilly thing at certain times. Like the record Jesus and Under the Black Sun, I believe, is another one. All good stuff, though. Very good. It's kind of like when they would play with bands like the Blasters, who are more of a straight-up rockabilly band. But great slice of essential LA punk right there for you. A few more essentials here. Starter pack, LA hardcore punk stuff, but stuff that I needed. Stuff that I've been meaning to purchase stuff by this band for forever. D.I. Horse Bites, Dog Cries, and Ancient Artifacts. Horse Bites, Dog Cries is their first full length, and Ancient Artifacts is a combination of other recordings, I think demos and maybe an EP or so. Rick Agnew, classic punk guitarist from the LA area, played in the Adolescents. His solo record's really good. Played in Christian Death. This is great, surfy, snotty punk rock stuff. At one point, Slayer covered Spiritual Law on their Undisputed Attitude record. And that's the angriest song on this. This actually feels kind of like rear-loaded in a sense. All the songs are good, like Hang 10 and East Berlin and stuff, but they seem to get a little bit more like hardcore and less like surfy and snotty towards the end, a little bit more like breakneck. And this is pretty much just like this, a lot of the same stuff, but a little bit more like raw recording, a little bit more amateurish. All these guys could really play, really play their asses off. My first introduction to them was in the movie Suburbia, which is a Corman classic. Both the director and like a hardcore dude, core man classic. Going back to the early 80s. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's got a very young Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers in it. It's a punksploitation film. Penelope Spheris put it out, or directed it rather. She also went on to do like Wayne's World and stuff like that, and the Decline of Western Civilization movies. But there's a lot of classic footage of TSOL, DI, and the Vandals, which is my next pick. I picked this up in Syracuse about a month ago when I was home visiting. This is really the only thing that I really like by the Vandals. They had an early beginning in the LA punk scene, and they put out this and When in Rome, Do As the Vandals, which I don't like nearly as much. It's a pretty decent early 80s LA hardcore record, but it's a lot more cleaned up than this stuff. And then I don't know what happened, if they went on hiatus or they just like didn't record anything for a while. I think they had some pretty significant member changes, if I'm remembering right. And they started to play more of like a modern, like no effects, Fat Records kind of sound, which is not really my thing. I remember they had an album called Live Fast Diarrhea, which is a real cerebral title. But anyway, this is fun shit. Wannabe Manor, Urban Struggle, Anarchy Burger. Anarchy Burger, Hold the Government. Great stuff. And as a bonus on this is there's a live set of about like 8 songs from around that era. But they had the best scenes in Suburbia, where the punks are like getting into trouble and there's drama going down while they're playing in the background. There's some great like OB strut skanking and moshing going on. Great band, at least on this recording. Then Blast. Picked this one up in Syracuse too. This is Power of Expression, or sorry, The Expression of Power. Apparently they've recorded this album like 3 or 4 times. This was one of the ones that they got rid of for one reason or another, or didn't keep. The original, as I misspoke and said, was The Expression of Power. These guys are really cool. I think they were maligned unfairly by a lot of people, including Henry Rollins, as a Black Flag ripoff band. The thing is, they had, in my humble opinion, compared to like Loose Nut era Black Flag, kind of better tone, like just a heavier sound. Their riffs and stuff didn't meander as much. It had more punch to it, but they had that kind of like LA hardcore punk meets like weird Sabbathy sludge. They pioneered a lot, and there's a probably very good reason why Southern Lord has reissued and reworked, retooled a bunch of their records. But this is a fantastic release, and I heard some of the earlier stuff, some of the stuff that came out on SST, and it definitely had a thinner sound. And this rediscovered session of this album is very full and heavy. It sounds awesome, so I'd recommend that. There's another one, It's in Our Blood, although I think the title also was reworked for the re-recording or reissue or whatever it is on Southern Lord. I'll put a little caption showing the cover, but that's also really good too. A little bit, from what I remember, a little bit doomier, a little bit more spaced out. While I'm talking shit on Black Flag, I might as well show off the 2 Black Flag CDs that I got here. They're both live ones. It looks like Greg Ginn's been reissuing stuff lately, which is good. I know that there's been a lot of issues, or from what I've read in passing, there's been issues with him reissuing stuff. I know that like some of the Bad Brain stuff was like difficult to get for a while, the stuff that came out on SST. Also the St. Vitus stuff. So I don't know if he's going to be, what the guy's deal is, if he's going to be reissuing all the bands on his label, but he has put out the Black Flag stuff again, which is great because I've been wanting to get these live records, Who's Got the 10.5 and Live 84, for quite a while. Mostly because I prefer demo and live versions of a lot of that in later or mid-period Henry Rollins era Black Flag. I like that stuff a lot. Like a lot of people, I love the early singles and the Keith Morris stuff and Nervous Breakdown and everything up to Damaged to this stuff. And as I've gotten older, I've given it more of an ear, and I've really come to appreciate it a lot more. And it depends on the mood I'm in, which era of Black Flag that I like. But these are not that far apart in time, I don't think. I think Who's Got the 10.5 is 85 or maybe early 86. But they've got songs from Loose Nut on this, My War, They do enough of the classics on it, you know, Gimme Gimme Gimme's on this, Louie Louie, that cover's on this, Wasted's on it. The Keith Morris stuff sounds really different on really different versions. This is a long one, this Live 84 one. 19 songs on it, a lot of the more dirgy stuff on it, but they mix it in with Jealous Again, Fix Me, Six Pack, you know, all that kind of stuff. Black Coffee's on it. I love that song. I gotta say, probably my favorite stuff from any of that era, not to be that guy, but it's probably the 83 demo, the one that's been booted a ton of times. It's just really, really crucial because they have Chuck Biscuits on drums, who played drums in Danzig, probably most famously, but also cut his teeth in DOA. He's originally Canadian, I think. He was in Social Distortion for a while. Just one of those people that has, like, his drum set's like a bass drum and like half a snare and a quarter of a cymbal. Like, he's got this minimalist, tiny drum set that he just beats the crap out of like a caveman. And to boot, he also talks about his favorite cereals on the Danzig home video, which is really, really funny because it's way out of pace with everything else that the other members of that band are trying to project. I'll try to put in a snippet of that here if YouTube will let me. It's really funny. You know, Glenn Danzig's talking about his books about werewolves and stuff, and John Christ is trying to talk about how he values his guitars more than his girlfriend or something. Just kind of like cringy stuff. Meanwhile, Chuck Biscuits is talking about how he likes Count Chocula cereal more than Blueberry. It's great. Next up, Look Mom No Head by the Cramps. I've been wanting this one for a while. I love the Cramps. I feel like to a certain generation of people, they're a kind of like disappointment band. And I mean that in the sense that a lot of people kind of felt lied to about what type of band they were. Pre-dial-up internet even, like in the mid-'80s into the late 80s, I remember seeing Gleaming the Cube with Christian Slater, where he's this rebellious punk skater. And whoever dressed him up for that movie did a great job. He's wearing, you know, a beat-up denim jacket with like a Crass logo on the back and all that kind of stuff. He's wearing all the late 80s skate gear, the Ratbone pants and everything. Stacy Peralta was pretty involved in that movie, so maybe that's why. But anyways, he's wearing a Cramps shirt at one point, and you'd see the Cramps in the t-shirt section of the Sessions catalog and in Thrasher magazine, sometimes early Rockabilia, and next to like Testament shirts, Exploited shirts, Black Flag shirts. And I think a lot of people saw their logo and the scary Bad Music for Bad People guy, the Frankenstein looking dude, and assumed that they were like some kind of thrashy punk band or something. And they're not. They're great. They're this swampy, scary, mid-paced, creepy, somewhat almost kind of gothy rockabilly band that went on to influence a lot of that psychobilly stuff that came out of Britain, and just very, very unique, very singular on their own terms kind of band. And the kind of their thing for the longest time was they didn't have a bass player. And I'm not sure, but this is at least one of their first records with a prominent bass sound, and they use it a lot, and it's awesome. And this is also a little bit more upbeat. It's not like thrashy or anything, but it's got a little bit more bounce to it than their early stuff, which is really primordial sounding. My favorite song on it, and definitely a mixtape classic that's been on a ton, is Eyeball in My Martini, which is just a fun jam. I'll put a link to it in the comments if you want to check it out. But this is a great record. You know, came out in 91. I think a lot of the stuff that they're known for was stuff that came out in the early 80s, but they kept going and gigging constantly right up until Lux passed away, which, God, has been 10 years or more now, come to think of it. But they used to play all the time in Rochester. Sadly, I never got a chance to catch them, even though I lived in upstate New York for half my life. Got a real risque Lux interior with, like, no pants on. You know, gender bending very early on there. Definitely a confrontational kind of band in a lot of ways that you wouldn't really think of for punk. Good stuff. Then, speaking of Western New York, as I just mentioned, we've got Envy from Buffalo. This is something I've been wanting to pick up for a while. They're a band that I saw once in Syracuse, and they were definitely a breath of fresh air. Before the Youth Crew revival stuff really started happening, like in New Jersey and Massachusetts, there was like Floor Punch and 10 Yard Fight that kind of came into prominence. Started around 95 or 96, but put out their records in 98, then In My Eyes and all that stuff. There was a bunch of bands playing fast, kind of Youth Crew-ish hardcore from Buffalo, in the early to mid 90s when nobody was doing that. Envy and Half Mast were the two most well-known ones. Plagued with Rage was a little bit more metallic, but Envy were great. The demo tape I had was very straightforward, angry, like pretty close to like Youth of Today in sound, I'd say, or maybe even the Judge 7-inch. This is a lot more melodic. This is more for people that are into stuff like Gorilla Biscuits. There's kind of a posy, melodic kind of quality to it. Turning Point maybe a little bit too, but a little bit more with pop hooks and less like epic parts or whatever. Vocalist for this band is this guy Larry Ransom, who had quite a career for a while being an assistant to Mike Vallely, the pro skater, when Mike still lived out in LA. He's been living somewhere in the Midwest for a while now, doing his thing out there, but he was in a lot of videos with Mike Vallely. I shouldn't say Vallely, because that's not the right way to pronounce the guy's name, apparently. He did a lot of like videos with him and online stuff with him back in the day, so that's what he did after this band. But yeah, cool youth crew hardcore. I don't think it gets talked about a lot. This is New Direction Records out of Lockport, New York, that put it out. Their earlier stuff was put out by Third Party Records, which was Nick Barron's label, singer from Half Mast and No Time Left. Then another Grand Theft Audio release. When I was combing Discogs looking for stuff I could afford, I picked up this Svart Sno discography. A lot of stuff on this. About 32 tracks, spanning a bunch of different releases. Smock and Roll, Berserweiser. Looks like a bunch of singles here. More classic Swedish hardcore stuff. You know, very influenced by Discharge, very noisy. Their sound gets a little bit more cohesive as it goes through the discography, as you can imagine. But yeah, I mean, certainly if you like any stuff like No Security or Anti-Cymex or anything like that, it's certainly along those lines. Swedish hardcore from the 80s into the 90s certainly has a sound, and it's all relatively similar, but it's all frickin' raging, so good stuff. Actually, let me grab more of that. Got some 90s Swedish hardcore to follow that up there. A couple of Diskonto CDs. This is a partial discography. This came out on Crimes Against Humanity. Discontography. Crimes Against Humanity. It's a pretty renowned label, like in the 2000s. They put out a lot of stuff. This is a lot of Diskonto's earlier stuff, a lot of their singles. There's a lot of songs on this. Good God, 66 songs. But again, more fast, raging Swedish hardcore, as I just described. I'd say a little bit more like aggro than the Svart Sno stuff, if you really wanted to split hairs about it. This is a full-length record, Watch Us Burn, that came out sometime in the 2000s, I believe. This is a little bit more rocking. There's a band called the Skit Kids that took that kind of raging Swedish hardcore stuff, that sort of Discharge-y kind of thing, amped up, like almost double-time Discharge kind of stuff, and added some like Motorhead, like hot solos and stuff all over it, and a little bit more rock and roll hooks. This is very similar to that. If you're familiar with Skit Kids and you haven't heard this Diskonto record, if you like maybe some more kind of motor charged kind of stuff, this would definitely be up your alley. Really good. Both of these were super cheap too, because punk on CD. That's another appeal to punk on CD. Like, a lot of people don't bother with it, you know what I mean? So it doesn't cost a lot, unless you get original pressings, which can be kind of pricey. Like, I kind of paid a little bit more than I should have for that exploited CD, but I really wanted it. It was the feeling of getting it back from being swindled way back in the day at the Nice and Easy in 91. Anyway, Manifest, 1994 to 2004, the official and complete 55-track discography of Abuse. Abuse had a split with Diskonto, so that's pretty appropriate that I'd be showing this afterwards. Again, tons of songs, 55 songs. A bit noisier, I'd say, like a little bit more rough on the old eardrums, a little bit more abrasive than Diskonto. It seems to have a really eardrum punishing kind of production, really noisy and like harsh, blistering kind of thing going on. But again, nothing too out of pocket with anything else that I've been talking about, you know. blistering, fast, D-beat influenced Swedish hardcore. We can swing on back to sunny California for a minute here. It was after a little bit that I realized I didn't have a lot of Descendents, and I wanted to rectify that. And around this time, we were going to see the Descendents with the Circle Jerks and bringing my son to his first show because he happens to like the Descendents. So I figured, why not fill a few holes here? Descendents Summary was something that I needed to get again. I had this back in the day. I wanted to have it. There's something about, it's a best of with all pre-release stuff that you can find on other records, but something about the arrangement of these songs it's just etched into my brain. If I listen to any of their full lengths, I expect a different song to come after the big hits. You know what I mean? Milo Goes to College is like all out of whack for me, just because this is the one that I had. And it's 28 songs. It's got a lot of the big ones, you know, Clean Sheets, Sour Grapes, Cheer, Pervert, Coolidge, I Like Food. They managed to mix in their kind of like really fast, kind of aggro, hardcore, goofy songs with their more like sad incel jams. You know, they're kind of sugary, melodic stuff. If you don't know the Descendents, for better or worse, pop punk exists because of these guys. I think another thing that should be noted is that they're incredibly talented musicians. Bill Stevenson's an incredible drummer. Like, they can all really, really play. Hurtin Crue, it's one of those songs where it's like, you guys just like were checking out Metallica or something and just wanted to fuck around and do something like that, right? For one song. Because it's a hardcore song and it's fast, but it's got like almost a speed metal riff to it. And it's funny because there's nothing else like that they did. I feel like Dag Nasty touched on that a little bit. Like, oh, okay, this sort of triple picking chuggy kind of thing. We can do that, no problem. But yeah, Descendents, love them. Then they came back in 1995. And as far as I remember, never really went away after that. They may have gone on a few hiatuses. But they came back with Everything Sucks, which might be their best record. I don't know if that's considered blasphemous or not, but Everything Sucks is really good. For one thing, it came out on Epitaph, and it's got really, really good production. I'd say there's a certain charm to Spot-produced stuff. Spot was the guy who actually recently passed away. Rest in peace. He was the guy that engineered a lot of the SST stuff, like most of it. Everything from St. Vitus to Black Flag to Descendents, and he had a very specific way that he approached. It was very like live in the studio and very good for that. But whoever produced this, which I haven't really looked up, did a really good job with the Descendents. It's super loud, full sound, great songs. Didn't lose a beat as far as the catchiness stuff goes. Then they came back in the 2000s with an EP and another album that were also great. Not quite as good, but really good stuff. And then there's Liveage, which is a great live record. Everything sounds perfect. Like, they don't really stray from the original versions that much. There's some okay like banter and stuff like that. Things are a little bit faster, like a lot of live punk records. Things are a little bit more upbeat, but yeah, that's also really great. Then we've got Damage, The Immortal Death, 86 to 87. This is verging into like crossover metal punk territory. This is a Finnish band. There's a lot of bands called Damage, many of them. The famous early 80s New York band, for example. There's at least 2 or 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. This is a Finnish band that I wasn't familiar with until I saw a description of the music in the Velted Regnub distro, which is a great distro. I'll leave a link for that, by the way. If you're looking for a lot of international hardcore stuff, D-beat stuff, crust, that's kind of the guy's lane. Good stuff. Anyways, I saw the description of this saying it was, if I'm remembering right, like kind of metal punkish kind of stuff, and I was like, okay, cool. And it is, but it's not like a clone of Forward into Battle by English Dogs or something like that, or Broken Bones. There's elements of that, especially on the 7-inch EP, self-titled 7-inch EP from 86 on this, kind of upbeat, D-beat influenced metal punk-ish kind of stuff. The album is pretty interesting. It kind of veers all over the place, but it's still pretty cohesive. It gets technical to the point where there's a song or two that almost reminds me of Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. Like, kind of technical, but like weird, dark, like kind of punkish thrash stuff. There's other songs on it that veer way more in the punk direction. A lot of it's kind of mid-paced and driving, with a fair amount of melody to it. but still very firmly like metallic punk stuff. It's kind of hard to really compare it to too much else. It's very good though. Interesting band. I believe there's a full-length stream on YouTube somewhere, so I'll include a link if you want to check it out. Another discography here, Sudden Impact, No Rest from the Wicked. Get it? They changed it around on you, From the Wicked. Great Canadian hardcore stuff. I heard these guys first from Mike Woodford from Uncommon Peller. Subscribe to Mike if you haven't. And he sent me a couple of their records. Both are really good. 7-inch, that's excellent. The No Rest from the Wicked LP, it's pretty much straightforward, bare bones hardcore kind of stuff. It's a little bit metal tinged. I wouldn't say it's crossover even remotely, but it's super tight, well produced, like a little bit of soloing and stuff like that. The Freaked Out demo is definitely more straightforward hardcore. And then they've got some live tracks. There's something about certain Canadian bands where it almost sounds like it could be from California or maybe the Midwest, but there's something just slightly different about it. Kind of like maybe like a little bit like the Zero Boys or something like that, but it's a little bit more pissed and a little bit more straightforward. Then we've got the Suburban Resistance CD given to me by my buddy Kevin, who sings for this band. When we were in Vegas, we hung out with him, gave me this and a tape. I've been following these guys since he started with them. It's cool. It's way more melodic, kind of rock and roll, sort of hardcore punk stuff, featuring the drummer from The Faction. The vocals and the snottiness and what Kevin's doing kind of reminds me of the Dickies. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Sloppy Seconds. It's not really like that Leather Jacket pop punk though. It's kind of its own thing. Super pro, like really well recorded, well produced, very catchy, snotty punk hardcore stuff. Good band. Then this one, I went back and forth about how I felt about this record. And I had a long back and forth with Marty Worm on Facebook about it. This is Bedtime for Democracy by the Dead Kennedys. I remember for a while thinking like this was not as great as some of their other stuff. Jello Biafra being on kind of a huge soapbox, ranting and preaching about stuff a little bit too much maybe. I don't know if I really feel that way as much anymore. I just prefer Plastic Surgery Disasters. That's probably my favorite Dead Kennedys LP. It's way more dark and weird, and there's a lot more like showing and not telling, if you know what I mean, like telling stories about essentially what Jello is into politically, about government corruption and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of like more like in your face, like, hey, this really sucks. Hey, stop doing this. I don't like, it's like more like that. That's my Jello Biafra impression. You're welcome. But it's, going back to this, it's so catchy and well written. I believe there was a hiatus before they recorded this as well. And I want to say this came after Frankenchrist, which is kind of weird because that record's way weirder and slower. I've had these songs like ingrained in the back of my brain, or at least 3 or 4 of them since high school, because a bunch of these made it onto mixtapes that a friend of mine made. Macho Insecurity, which is a ripper, and that's got great lyrics too. I can't diss on that. Chicken Shit Conformist, which it's one of those things about like what's going wrong with the punk scene at the time, and it's odd to like look at the lyrics from that and being like, wow, these things have just cycled over and over again, But at the end of the day, the music, it's Dead Kennedys doing what they do best, which are these like really fast, short, obnoxious punk songs. It almost kind of feels like they were doing a bit, like doing almost like their own interpretation of their earlier material, covering themselves, so to speak, at this point. But it's still awesome. You can't go wrong with the Mad Magazine style cover art there, Like, it's pretty great. Not my favorite Dead Kennedys, but I think I've gone back on liking it a lot more than I used to, is the TLDR on that one. Then I've got a Discharge tribute, Discharged. I always saw this around. I want to say I picked it up from Round Flat Records, which is like a second run. Like, I think they get a lot of like dead stock stuff. I've been ordering from them literally since the 90s. They have their own website. They're on Discogs. Check them out. They have a lot of great, kind of hard to find punk stuff and some metal stuff too. This has a lot of heavy hitters from the era. I want to say, this came out in 92, so a big who's who of bands at the time, and some that I'm not familiar with, covering the classic Immortal Discharge, kicking off with Extreme Noise Terror, Concrete Socks, Disaster, Excrement of War, Raw Noise, Nausea, doing Hear Nothing, See Nothing, SDS from Japan, the band that had a split with Misery there, real good stuff. Scamp, who I'm not familiar with, but that's a really adorable name, and CFUDL. I know a CFDL, but not a CFUDL. Not too familiar with them. But all in all, like, really great Discharge tribute. I have the other one that's a 7-inch that weirdly has 411 covering a Discharge song, and that's pretty cool too. And then the Proletariat, Voodoo Economics and Other American Tragedies on Tang Records. Tang from Boston, the somewhat shady Tang Records from Boston that put out a lot of classic Boston hardcore. This is a 2-disc discography. Proletariat were a respected band in the Boston scene, but were, as far as I can tell, I wasn't around, early 80s band, that were pretty outside of a lot of stuff, kind of the way the Crucifix were in Michigan. These guys were staunch leftists, very political, very like post-punk, like a lot of, I wouldn't say industrial, but a lot of like more like mid-paced, intricate, bass guitar heavy kind of stuff going on. Like you could tell they probably liked their Killing Joke, but also very like anarcho-punk kind of influenced, but with its own total American hardcore spin on everything. Very cool band, lots of tracks on this, but all of it's really, really solid. I would recommend them to anybody who likes post-punk stuff and anarcho-punk stuff. They were kind of marching to their own drummer, you could tell they liked that stuff and were influenced by it, but were doing their own thing. They had tracks on the This Is Boston Not LA comp, which is an absolute classic, as well as the Unsafe at Any Speed comp, alongside with all these bands like the FUs and Jerry's Kids and stuff. They were the more like po-faced academic left-leaning guys in that scene. A few more. Then 90s stuff. Initial State, Abort the Soul. I picked this up around the same time I was grabbing a lot of that Guyana Punchline and Inhumanity stuff, kind of a lot of that Screamo stuff. This band is from South Carolina and shared members with both Guyana Punchline and Inhumanity, I think. A lot less kind of like discordant, bashy, screamy. It's a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more dirge laden, but also occasionally fast, kind of crust sort of stuff, very metallic. There's not too much stuff that I can say sounds exactly like this or even really that close to it. I could tell like a lot of bands at the time, they were probably listening to early Neurosis and maybe some metallic hardcore stuff and some crust, but they certainly have their own approach and it's really good. If it shouldn't be a problem for me to leave a sound clip here because I don't think this stuff is gonna get me struck copyright wise, so I'll leave you a little snippet just so you get a good idea. It's great. Society Gone Mad with 2 D's. Society Gone Mad. Save Room for Dessert. It's a great name. I always thought this was like an obscure 80s band from California, but this didn't come out until 97. And I feel like there was a certain like strain of bands in the mid 90s that were the real troopers that stuck it out for like quote unquote true punk or true hardcore punk in an era when that stuff was not so fashionable. And I mean, I talked about that at length in my 90s hardcore video, but also bands that were a little bit more on the punk side of things, like Broken from Connecticut, and Abalian Nation from Binghamton, New York, to some extent, even Toxic Narcotic from Boston. These guys, I feel like were kind of that style. Just gnarly punk rock, but kind of a heavier variety, good at what they were doing. Almost sort of like a Poison Idea leaning thing. I imagine all the guys in this band being like over 6 feet tall and 250 pounds, but I can't really substantiate that. Because there's no pictures of the band. They certainly sound like big threatening dudes playing punk rock. Again, maybe a little bit on the metallic side, fast, angry kind of stuff. Battalion of Saints, Poison Idea, kind of along those lines. Great though. Then I farm, so my kids won't have to. Always a great live band. I saw these guys 2 or 3 times when I lived in upstate New York. They were from Ithaca. They came to Syracuse a handful of times. They were really funny, sarcastic dudes. Their music, along the lines of like Plow United or The Disenchanted, was sort of... It's funny because it took the really, really tight, very, very fast and verging on melodic elements from a lot of the Fat Record stuff, it seemed like. It had that kind of no effects sort of tinge to it, but it was way more abrasive, way more stripped down. You know, wasn't crazy layered, harmonized vocals and that kind of stuff. Their sound kind of took that tightness that a lot of those bands had and made it a lot more like meaner sounding.
Spoil your dinner. Stay away from you. No one's coming after you. Spoil your dinner. This is close enough to be a virus. Radiation. Radiation.
Best way for me to describe it. And there was a few bands that did that well, and the aforementioned Plow United and these guys and The Disenchanted. There might be 1 or 2 more that I'm thinking of. But yeah, great band. They were sick live. They were really funny. And D.S.B, Kill the Phantom City. Great Japanese hardcore stuff. Nothing will quite top their No Fight, No Get 7-inch for me. I wouldn't say that they're exactly straight up Burning Spirits style. I don't think they have quite that level of like face meltingness to them, but they really have like a very cohesive, like very, very tight, rumbly, kind of motor punkish kind of thing to them. And I dig them a lot. They were a huge deal for a while. I saw them when they toured the U.S. It was around the time not a ton of Japanese bands broke in the U.S. yet. Like Gauze, I think, had come and played, and 1 or 2 others that I'm not remembering. DSB, I want to say, before a lot of the bands started playing like Chaos and Taos and stuff like that, they played a handful of shows on the East Coast and then played a handful of shows on the West Coast. And I saw them in Portland, Oregon with From Ashes Rise and Blood Spit Nights, and they were one of the best live bands I've ever seen. Just the energy was insane. And then finally, Under the Scalpel Blade, One Day Son, This Will Be Yours with a Z. 2 albums on one, Disorder. Anagram Records released this. They were one of the main labels that would release all this, reissue all this UK punk stuff and oi stuff in the 90s when a lot of this stuff was kind of hard to come by on vinyl. Great stuff. I mean, Disorder are known for being super noisy and chaotic punk. If you know anything about UK punk, you probably know that. I want to go ahead and say that they probably influenced grindcore to some extent, but I don't have any actual documented evidence of that. But you'd see them on gigs with Napalm Death and stuff like that early in the beginning. Them and Chaos UK are kind of considered similar in a lot of contexts because they both had like a really rough falling apart at the seams kind of approach, at least for a lot of albums in the beginning of their career. I like how a lot of this stuff just sounds like a mess, and then they'll get into a chorus where everybody's shouting and it kind of comes together in like a drunken, furious mess. Cool band. There's a little bit of like, there's like an almost speed metal riff on the first song, Driller Killer, which is about the video nasty there. Probably the band named himself after that as well. But really, there's not like a lot of that going on. They might have been trying to attempt a little bit of thrash on it slightly, but only just a touch. So good stuff. All right, that's about it. A lot of people have been doing mid-year kind of lists, and I was thinking about doing that before. I realized it's pretty well-tread territory. A lot of people do those, but there are a bunch of good releases from 2024 that I want to talk about. I was just flipping through my just purchased crates from the past 6 months or so and looking at a bunch of good stuff. So the new Public Acid, it's great. A bunch of other records. So I'll be talking about a whole bunch of stuff that I like so far from the year, probably next update. That is it, unless I think of something else. That is it for right now. Everybody have a good one, good weekend, day, evening, or whatever you're having. Enjoy it. Later.
What the hell are you dressed up for? Yeah, where's the war? Up your ass.